So a new Second Amendment case was just granted review by the United States Supreme Court. That means during this next term, the Supreme Court will hear and decide another major 2A case. So let's talk about what just happened. Now, really quick before we jump in this video, I want to ask you all for a huge favor. Just double check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel because YouTube loves to unsubscribe people. And then if you find value in this video, just consider subscribing. And also, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is Brownells. Brownells is an amazing company. They're pro 2A. I recently got to spend some time out with them over in Iowa. It was an amazing time, and the employees there believe in the Second Amendment. The company believes in the Second Amendment, so they're supporting this channel. So if you guys want to check them out, I can't link to them, but I'm sure you can find them. It's Brownells, and if you use the code SCHOLAR10, you can get 10% off of any order. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we are going to be breaking down and talking about a huge Second Amendment case, which the Supreme Court just granted review to. That means that the Supreme Court will hear another major Second Amendment case, and that is going to be the Smith & Wesson versus Mexico lawsuit. In this case, a group of the largest firearms manufacturers, including Smith & Wesson, Barrett, Century Arms, Colt, Glock, Ruger, and many more, were sued by the nation of Mexico. Mexico is suing these companies in an attempt to hold them liable for the harms that they believe were caused by cartels in their own country. This whole lawsuit and this whole case revolves around the PLCAA and whether or not a nation like Mexico and potentially other people, even individuals, can sue gun companies and gun manufacturers and try to hold them liable for third-party criminal conduct. Now, this is a case we've covered on the channel before. I've covered this, I believe, like 6 months ago. And at that time, everybody in the 2A community wasn't that concerned about it. But I told you guys this was a critical case that was up for Supreme Court review and was likely going to be granted review, and that's what just happened. The Supreme Court has granted review to this case, and so we need to bring general awareness to this critical case that is now going to be decided by the Supreme Court. What happened in this lawsuit is Mexico sued gun manufacturers, the list of manufacturers that I mentioned, and is trying to hold them liable for harms that were caused to the nation of Mexico and individuals in Mexico because of drug cartels. According to Mexico, America's firearms companies have engaged in a series of quote-unquote business practices for decades, from selling semi-automatic rifles to making magazines that hold more than 10 rounds to failing to impose various sales restrictions that have created a supply of firearms which were then later, in their eyes, smuggled across the border by criminals and ultimately used by cartels to commit crimes. Mexico sued these companies, and they claim that there has been $238 billion in damages to the nation of Mexico, and they seek to recover at least $10 billion in compensation. They are also asking for injunctive relief in the form of America having to impose new gun control measures in the United States to essentially restrict the sale of these types of rifles and magazines. So they're trying to use this lawsuit to also force American policy nationwide. Now, this case was originally filed and heard in a district court in Massachusetts, and on review, the district court dismissed the case under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, also known as the PLCAA, which bars these types of lawsuits from even proceeding forward. Mexico then appealed that dismissal up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And on review, the First Circuit Court of Appeals reversed that dismissal. The First Circuit held that the PLCAA does not bar this type of suit because Mexico stated a claim that the defendant's business practices have aided and abetted firearms trafficking to cartels, and because of that, they claim that there is a proximate harm that was caused to Mexico and its government. And in response to that, you now have these companies that have filed for Supreme Court review. They have asked for the Supreme Court here to reverse the First Circuit's decision and uphold what the district court said, that yes, the PLCAA prevents these types of lawsuits. Now, the questions presented to the Supreme Court for review are: 1, whether the production and sale of firearms in the United States is the approximate cause of alleged injuries to the Mexican government stemming from violence committed by drug cartels in Mexico. And 2, whether the production and sale of firearms in the United States amounts to aiding and abetting illegal firearms trafficking, because some of those firearms may end up eventually in the nation of Mexico. Now, you may be asking yourself, what exactly is the PLCAA? What is the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act? The PLCAA is a U.S. law that protects firearms companies and dealers from being held liable because crimes are committed by third-party actors with their products. So this law is used to essentially prevent a person from suing a gun manufacturer or a gun company when a third party takes a gun and commits a crime. However, in this lawsuit, the First Circuit found that this case should not be dismissed under the PLCAA. In their petition to the Supreme Court, the gun companies argue that Mexico's complaint does not include any groundbreaking factual revelations, nor does it uncover any secret dealings between the cartels and American farms companies. Instead, Mexico's suit challenges how the American farms industry has openly operated in broad daylight for many years. It faults the defendants for producing common firearms like the AR-15 and for allowing their products to hold more than 10 rounds, for failing to restrict the purchase of firearms by regular citizens, and for refusing to go beyond what American law already requires for safe production and sale of firearms. In Mexico's eyes, continuing these lawful practices amounts to aiding and abetting the cartels. According to Mexico, American firearms companies are liable because they have refused to adopt policies to curtail this supply of firearms which they believe are smuggled to the South. And it is nearly impossible to imagine a suit that is more clearly barred by the PLCAA than this one here. They go on to say that the district court agreed, dismissing this case in full, but the First Circuit reversed. It held that Mexico's lawsuit qualified for an exception to the PLCAA, which narrowly authorized suits alleging knowing violations of firearms laws that proximately caused a plaintiff's injuries. This court's review is warranted, they state. The First Circuit's decision creates a direct and admitted split on the proximate cause, and it is brazenly defying this court's precedent on aiding and abetting. They conclude their petition by stating the stakes of this case underscores why review is needed. Absent this court's intervention, Mexico's multi-billion-dollar lawsuit will hang over American farms industries for years, inflicting costly and intrusive discovery at the hands of foreign sovereigns that are trying to bully the industry into adopting a host of gun control measures that have been repeatedly rejected by American voters. They state that at its core, this case reduces to a clash of national values where Mexico makes no secret that it abhors this country's approach to firearms and that it wants to use America's court system to impose domestic gun controls on the United States that American people themselves would never accept through the ordinary political process. So the petition here up to the Supreme Court is simply pointing out that the PLCAA should block this type of lawsuit, that the First Circuit found an exemption to this whole aiding and abetting of just the normal practices of selling these types of common firearms, that was enough to show aiding and abetting to allow this case to proceed forward, even despite the PLCAA. And then they also point out that this lawsuit here used by Mexico in conjunction with anti-gun groups like Giffords and Everytown, because Giffords and Everytown are giving the nation of Mexico their attorneys to help file this lawsuit against companies like Smith & Wesson. They are using the court system and this process to try to force national gun control, national rifle bans, national magazine bans in a way where voters in large have rejected these types of gun control measures, but they're trying to use this lawsuit to force it. So this is a very important case, and at stake in this case is whether or not the gun industry at large can essentially be sued into oblivion. Mexico and these anti-gunners want to use this lawsuit to set a dangerous precedent, which then opens the door to essentially attack and try to weaken the Second Amendment. But now this attack on the Second Amendment will be reviewed by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has granted review to this issue. So this term, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on this issue and ultimately issue a decision on whether or not this type of lawsuit should ever be allowed to actually be filed and move forward. Also going to be interesting to see what type of language is included in a case like this, talking about these types of rifles and magazines, because this could be one of those cases where you have a nation of Mexico saying that these types of firearms are so dangerous, maybe that they're not protected. And so you could see some additional language about the protection of rifles and magazines also sneaking into this decision. So a very important case that will now be decided by the Supreme Court. Make sure you share this news around because this is an issue that everybody needs to know about. Unfortunately, some of these defendants like Smith & Wesson and others can't openly talk about this case or promote this case because, of course, they're defendants, so they can't really talk about it. So we need to do it for them and share this news and get this information out to everyone. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below and I will try to answer to the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and never forget this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.